In the grueling air combat of World War II, sometimes it was more than skill alone that could determine the fate of a pilot. Many times it was simply luck, either good or bad, that would decide whether an airman might live or die. Well, in this video, we will take a look at the strange story of an American pilot who was saved not once, but twice from near-death experiences by luck and the hand of fate. As you will see in a few moments, Jack Ilfrey would be stationed in England. Here, surprise packages from home were always a welcome sight. Today, you can get that same joy with this video's sponsor, Bespoke Post. Bespoke Post is the monthly membership club that delivers top-shelf goods for all kinds of cool interests. You name it, outdoor gear, home and kitchen goods, clothing, and so much more. Basically, you sign up for free, take their preference quiz so they can custom pick your items, and then they send you a preview of that month's box before it ships. You can keep it, swap it, or skip that month at no cost. Each box has around $70 worth of items in it, but only costs around a fraction of that to you. Here are some of the great things that I've gotten in my boxes so far. A custom pack of hot sauces, and yes, they have been opened because I was too excited to wait. As well as a task organizer and a sleek wristwatch so I can make sure I stay on my schedule. So, if you want to get an exciting package each month with all sorts of cool stuff, go to bespokepost.com/TJ3History20 and enter my promo code at checkout to get 20% off your first box. Don't wait, sign up for Bespoke Post today since they are supporting your favorite history videos. Thanks to Bespoke Post, and without further ado, enjoy. This is Jack Milton Ilfrey, more commonly known as Happy Jack. The native Texan was always cheerful and was known to be a delight to everyone he met. He would join the U.S. Army Air Corps in April of 1941 and would be one of the earliest pilots to see combat for the Americans after he was sent to England in early 1942 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Here, he would join the 1st Fighter Group, which saw him assigned to the twin-engine P-38 Lightning, a solid fighter that had just entered service. This aircraft would prove to be a formidable dogfighter and would serve in a large variety of roles in every theater of the conflict. But before it saw combat, however, the Americans had to transfer all of these aircraft to their assigned fronts. With the United States just recently entering the war, many of the men, machines, and supplies were still being moved to the front lines. The 1st Fighter Group and Jack Ilfrey were no different. On November 15th of 1942, Happy Jack and the rest of his unit were tasked with flying their P-38s from England to North Africa, where they would join the war effort as part of Operation Torch. This would be a standard ferry flight and was normally no problem for these trained pilots. But for Happy Jack on this day, something would go wrong. As he flew south, one of his fuel tanks malfunctioned, and during the trip, he would subsequently run out of gas. Thus, Jack Ilfrey was forced to make an emergency landing in Portugal, a neutral country on his route to North Africa. Upon exiting his aircraft, he was informed by officials that in accordance to the laws of neutrality, he would be interred there in Portugal for the remainder of the war, which was likely to be years. Understandably, Happy Jack was not thrilled with this idea, but had no idea what to do. He was essentially a prisoner of war in a nation that was not even the enemy. But this is where the strange tales would just begin for the American hero. Somehow, Jack convinced the Portuguese ground crews that in order for them to appropriately inspect and test the aircraft, it needed to be refueled. Shortly thereafter, a Portuguese major came over to inspect the plane, where Jack graciously volunteered to show him around the cockpit and instruct him on how to fly the plane. The major then climbed onto its wing and was looking around the new American plane when Happy Jack instantly pushed the throttles forward, throwing the official off of the aircraft and shooting his P-38 forward. He shut the cockpit and blazed down the runway, where his wheels left the ground and he tore into the sky. A few hours later, the bold American pilot and his plane arrived in North Africa, where he was berated by a commanding officer for nearly causing an international relations disaster. Fortunately for Jack, however, Jimmy Doolittle himself, the commander of the 12th Air Force, would step in on his behalf and calm the situation. This was a wise decision because Jack would make it very clear in the near future that he was a pilot that the United States wanted fighting on their side. On November 29th, just 2 weeks later, in one of his first combat missions, Jack Ilfrey would share in the downing of a Messerschmitt Bf-110 fighter for his first victory. Although it would only be scored half a kill as he split the victory with a wingman, it was still a significant milestone for any airman. Less than a week later, he would score his first full kill when he downed 2 Messerschmitt Bf-109s in a single mission over Tunisia. A few weeks later, he had yet another successful day when he was credited with the destruction of a pair of Focke-Wulf 190s, bringing his total tally to 4.5. And then, finally, on a mission on March 3rd of 1943, Happy Jack would take down one more Focke-Wulf, raising his total tally to 5.5 kills and making him the first American ace in the P-38 Lightning. Following this achievement, Jack Ilfrey would damage one more German fighter before being sent back to the States. This was a common American military policy during this time, as it was believed that it was better to protect their seasoned aces for propaganda and training purposes. So, Jack was sent back to California to train new recruits and was removed from the combat front. But little did he know that his perils were far from over. To his surprise, a little over a year later, it was decided that Jack could be more useful as a squadron commander for the air support of the upcoming invasions at Normandy. Thus, in the spring of 1944, he was sent back across the Atlantic to England, where he was assigned to the 20th Fighter Group and back with his beloved P-38 Lightning. It was at this time that his aircraft would be given a name that would go down in history: Happy Jack's Go Buggy. As the seasoned pilot took to the skies once again, he quickly jumped back into action with a newfound aggression and confidence. But this aggression nearly cost Jack his life. On an escort mission over Germany on May 24th, his unit found themselves in a thick dogfight over Berlin. The battle raged in the sky, and Jack was faring well. He had just destroyed a Messerschmitt Bf-109, his first kill since he had rejoined the front lines. But a few minutes after this, while executing the tight maneuvers of dogfighting, Happy Jack's Go Buggy collided with a German aircraft. The crash destroyed the 109, which quickly began to plummet towards the ground, and severely damaged Jack's P-38. His plane was missing 4 to 5 feet off of one of its wings, and it was shaking violently. For many pilots, this would be a death sentence. The imbalance of the aircraft would be far too much for most to handle, and the violent spin would spell the end as they met a fiery death on the ground. But somehow a miracle happened. Through the combination of incredible luck and likely a high degree of skill as well, Jack Ilfrey's plane was still flyable, and he managed to regain control of the crippled aircraft. Happy Jack would miraculously limp his fighter all the way back to England with just half a wing, living to fight another day. But yet again, this near-death experience would not be the last of its kind for the famous pilot. 2 weeks later, a few days after D-Day, Jack found himself on a ground attack mission over France. During this sortie, the 20th Fighter Group was assigned to attack railways and supply lines. As the mission went on, many of the ground targets were hit hard by the P-38s. Jack, in specific, was strafing an enemy train on the ground when a German flak emplacement would place him in their crosshairs, letting out a burst right at his P-38. His aircraft would take a direct hit and one of the engines would catch fire. Already at a low altitude for a ground attack run, this was not a good situation. With an engine engulfed in flames, a crash landing would be extremely risky, as his aircraft could likely explode. So instead, Jack opted to try and bail out of his fighter. He opened his canopy and leapt from the plane, and again, either luck or the hand of fate decided to spare him from death, not only during the fall, but in the good fortunes that followed. As he exited the aircraft, his altitude was far too low. His parachute opened just barely before he met the ground, where he landed heavily on the roof of a farm building. If his altitude had been just a little lower, or if he had landed in the trees, it is entirely possible that he would have not survived this landing. Furthermore, his situation turned out to be even more favorable once he came to on the ground. Despite being deep behind enemy lines and very close to German troops, the French family which he had landed upon kindly welcomed the American pilot, despite the strict consequences that they would have faced if caught. They quickly hid his parachute and took him inside, and because of this, the German soldiers on the ground were never able to locate where the American had landed. Over the next few days, he was given shelter, food, a bicycle, and false identity papers claiming that he was a deaf and mute farmer named Jacques Robert. This would obviously aid him if he came across any Germans, since he could claim that he was unable to hear them or speak. 2 weeks later, through a long journey, he was able to cross many miles of the French countryside on his bike and was able to cross into friendly territory. The American hero would go on to transfer to the P-51 Mustang shortly after, before ending his tour of duty in December of 1944. He was sent back to the States and would eventually pass away in 2004 at the age of 84. Comment what story I should cover next, and please consider subscribing.